The light is pretty flat today. The thing is that while most photographers would avoid going out on days like today, I actually think that they make for anything but boring photography. In fact, other than a foggy day, of course, there's nothing I like more than a flat, gray and cloudy day. And that is because these conditions give us a blank canvas to create the images we envision, rather than simply capturing what's in front of us, especially in the context of black and white photography. Take this image I made this morning as an example. This is what I envisioned, but the flat light gives us the flexibility to create wildly different versions of the same scene. We would not be able to do any of this if the light was more opinionated, let's say. I just came back from a little walk around the Pacifica. That's where I took the photograph I just showed you. I love photographing that pier early in the morning, especially on cloudy days like today. Yes, it was pretty gray, there was no contrast, no drama, but in my opinion, that made it perfect. In these conditions, I have full control over the final image, both in the field and in post-processing. I'm going to use that photograph to illustrate what I'm trying to say here. We're going to see how I made it in the field and how I edited it, and why the flat light enabled me to do that, and what I could have done differently if I wanted to. In the field, I aim for an exposure that is as neutral as possible while still working for my vision. Let me explain. What I mean here is that sometimes I know I'll be, say crashing the shadows in post, and still I don't fully commit in camera to that idea. I go for a slightly underexposed exposure instead. The reason is because I want a raw file that is flexible enough that I can create my original vision for that image, but also one that lets me play and experiment with a very different approach. We'll see how we can do that in post in a second. But what it means in the field, and in the example of the photograph that we are talking about, I just went with a very neutral zero exposure compensation. Also, even though I like to destroy my images in post by reducing the clarity and adding some haze and grain and vignettes and whatnot, I still want the cleanest file possible. My first priority is getting the shot, and that's why I shoot most of the time in aperture priority mode, and I let the camera choose most of the settings. This is very important to me in specific situations when the conditions are quickly changing, because it lets me focus on what matters the most to me, that is getting the right composition at the right moment with the mood I want. But if I do have the time, like I did this morning, then I try to dial the settings that give me a clean file. That's also why I use good ND filters in my long exposures. You can get great results with much cheaper gear. In fact, one of my favorite images, this one, is a long exposure I made using a $5 welding glass instead of high quality ND filters like these ones. The problem is that if you look at the raw file, well, it has a pretty huge color cast. It wasn't a big deal for that specific shot, but in general, I like to have accurate color information in my raw file so I can play with that in post. These ND filters by case are so good that I can stack them up one on top of each other and still get very sharp results. That is very important when I'm shooting in broad daylight, because I need a lot of stops to get the exposure I want. And I don't lose much sharpness by doing so. Again, I might decrease the sharpness in post, and I most likely will do that, but I like having the option. Again, it's all about giving ourselves the flexibility to go in either direction. In short, my goal in the field is something like this. Focus on composition and mood first, and when possible, try to get the most flexible raw file, because that will allow us to push the image however we want. Let's talk about post-processing now and how we can take those dull images and make them really beautiful. And we're going to use the photograph I showed you at the beginning of the video as an example. This that you can see here is the raw file converted to monochrome Nothing else has been done to it yet. As you can see, it's low contrast, very flat, which is ideal. The ideal starting point in my opinion, because we can take it in any direction we want, depending on what we saw in the field or how we feel when we edit this image a few days later or even down the road, years in the future. I really like to revisit my old images and see what I can make of them. In any case, all the editing that we are going to be doing here is pretty basic, just some global adjustments and a few pretty basic also local changes using gradients. But if you want to get really deep with the creative black and white editing, you should definitely check out my ebook on that topic. You can find the link in the description down below. As I said, we can take this file in multiple directions. Let's see a few of them. This is the first one, a pretty bright image. The contrast is still low and the tones are very delicate compared to this much darker version with the increased contrast. It evokes a completely different feeling. The bright image feels more calm, whereas this edit feels a bit more unnerving, right? Thanks to the very flat raw file we started with, we can take this even farther by using a couple of linear gradients, both on the top and the bottom of the frame, as you can see here. Those direct the attention to the peer and at the same time add a bit of extra drama to the feeling this image evokes. Again, compare it to the previous version and how different they look and they make you feel. The flat light also means we can play with textures more than we can when we have harsh light. In this example, I used a mask. I used a brush mask here to lift the shadows to show plenty of detail on the peer. I also increased the clarity and the texture only on the peer without affecting the rest of the frame. This means we can zoom in and appreciate that aging peer. Or we can make it a silhouette by darkening it to the point of totally crashing the shadows. Obviously, I overdid it a little bit here just to show the contrast between both approaches, but I hope this shows how different the possible paths we can take are, all from the same single raw file. I took this other photograph you see here after the sun had come out from behind the clouds. Now we have dark and bright spots on the pier, there are shadows on the pillars, and while this can most definitely still be a great photograph, we don't have as much latitude anymore. There is only so much we can do with this. And that is because fighting the light that we have in the field is futile. And we can and will end up with bad results if we try. And it's not even that bad in this example because the rest of the frame is pretty much empty. But if we had some rocks, say, on the foreground, those could be affected by the light as well, creating all sorts of challenges. I guess this is my love letter to dull, boring light. I love these conditions because they allow me to get a very neutral starting point that I can use to make my vision possible and many other visions I might have in the future. I can make that photograph truly my own. I hope this motivates you to get out more often on cloudy days and to let your vision take over. Thank you so much for watching and see you in the next one.